Wow. That's so
Welcome back.
magical and mystical. I feel like I just got sprinkled with some squirrel fairy dust. I love it. Oleg,
Oh,
it is good to see you. How is Athens? Well, where are you?
I'm in Athens.
Athens,
Um,
Georgia? It doesn't look like
yeah,
Georgia to me.
yes, Athens, Georgia. No, Greece. I'm
Greece.
second day here.
Amazing. What did you see today, Oleg?
I went to, so I saw Acropolis.
Ah,
Um, yeah, that was quite the thing, quite the
it's quite
adventure.
a sight, is it not?
And then I saw the stadium where the first Olympic Games were, I think.
Well, not the
First or the
ones
second.
from clear back in the however many years ago, but the modern ones, I assume.
Y- Yeah, the modern ones. Um,
Awesome.
and other than that, just saw the city itself. It's really beautiful. There's a lot of, as you know, there's a lot of history, and it's
Yeah,
really ancient, and makes me appreciate the things I'm able to experience back home even more, like
yeah,
heating,
yeah,
filtered water,
yeah.
washer and dryer,
Absolutely. Yeah,
you know, and the
yeah.
list goes on and
Yeah,
on.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, you're touching antiquity, and that is an amazing thing to experience. Oleg,
Yeah,
doing this was a big change in your life.
yeah,
What motivated that change? You were living a perfectly fine existence that would be the envy of anyone in Austin. You were getting up at 7 in the morning, going to BNI. You were hosting podcasts left and right. You were living in an apartment. You had a cute dog that loved you.
yeah.
You were comfortable in America. Everything was going well. Why would you need change?
I wanted to I wanted to travel for a while actually, and I think for me, I just for many years I hesitated on pulling that trigger because of the variety of stories I heard around me, like not the right time. Then the coronavirus happened, and then there was just another obstacle along the way where change had to be pushed back and put on the back burner, and too many responsibilities, not enough money, all these other things. And then I just started to realize that there's always going to be obstacles on any given day. And then if that's the case, then why don't I just try and figure out how to through some of these obstacles from a different location and from a different environment. So it was a challenging step to be able to do that, to give up a lot of the things that I built.
Mhm.
But what I keep realizing is I didn't really have to give them up.
What do you
Rather,
mean?
I think they've all become a part of my journey. I think what I've actually learned in having traveled for 2 months or very close to 2 months, I left your apartment. I think it was on the 11th or 12th.
I thought I was part of the
Um,
journey. My heart just broke.
and you are part of the journey, but what I've realized is that through this travel, many of the people that I was friends with have actually become closer
Man.
because our communication changed now. So because I'm not able to call people just straight from my phone anymore, we're having to do a lot of FaceTime and video calls, and that has enhanced many of my friendships that I have to this point. So I think that was one big thing. I think the other thing, that talking about this concept of what inspired me to change, is my own personal drive. I've been wanting to figure out, for myself speaking, who am I in the times of adversity, and how can I best use those skills that I'm able to learn for myself to help other people when they experience their own difficult circumstances in their lives. And I think I've definitely learned that through this trip. But I've also learned another very key, for me, it's a very key lesson, and that's be very careful what you choose to focus on, because it does expand. And
Hmm.
that's something that I've realized over the years, and this time it became even more crystal clear, is because I've chose to focus on this concept of adversity for the past 4 to 5 to maybe even 6 years. I've experienced some very adverse circumstances throughout the
Hmm.
years, and
More so than before?
I would say so, yeah, because I was
Yeah, thank you.
consciously putting that thought out there. Like, what would it be like if I was in X, Y, and Z circumstances, and what would it be like if I were to able to work through them in certain ways? So I think it's yeah, I think there's a big lesson, an important lesson for me within that. Maybe as well as for you. I don't know if you've had a or Kim. I don't know if you guys have had similar journeys to that.
Well, before we say anything, Kim Schultz, welcome back home. Love seeing you. Thank you for joining us. And it always brings me happiness to seeing your face here. Oleg is calling in from Athens, Greece. And we're talking about what motivates change in our life. Now, Kim, you have actually had a lot of changes in your life. And that to me is part of what has made you such a standout sort of person and someone who's not afraid to really just be Kim, be out there.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, as we go along in the conversation, I would really love to hear your thoughts about what's motivated changes in your life and how you may have motivated changes in the lives of others who have needed it. There was an interesting, actually, oh my goodness, talk of change. Yes, Kim. And I'm actually, Kim, I hope you don't mind this. If you do mind it, then I ask for your forgiveness in advance. And then tell me, Scott, can you please stop? And I will 100% stop. So I was reading Facebook somewhere, Kim. I won't say where, but I was just reading Facebook somewhere. And there was a whole conversation about coaching. And in that conversation, someone said, I don't like to use coaches because I don't like people telling me what to do. And Kim, in a moment of rare Kimness, said, I don't like to be told what to do either, if I remember right. Kim said, I don't like to be told what to do, but I do like improving. I do like having more profits. I do like seeing my business grow. I do like getting ahead faster, right? Like she listed this whole other set of things. And what that said to me, whether Kim realized it or not, was that she was saying that she was open to the idea of change because she was motivated by what the outcome of that change might be. That was
Hmm.
also embedded that in that a comment. Kim didn't directly say it, but it was sort of being said, yeah, these things are more important than me like needing to be bossy and in control. But
Hmm.
I'm saying I read that into Kim, what Kim said. Kim did not say that directly. So I'm putting words in Kim's mouth, and I'm sure Kim will correct me if Kim don't like what I'm saying. But all as I can say, good. Kim said I'm correct. Whew, I didn't need that sort of change in my life. So all that is to say, to what extent do you feel driven by
Hmm.
outcome as change versus process during change? Because one of the things Kim didn't mention that was a reason she liked coaching or being coached or was open to coaching was the coaching process that she experienced. Kim, you listed the outcomes of it. And so I am curious, Oleg, you seem to be a little bit more process oriented in what you were thinking about with regards to change. I like the journey.
Hmm.
I'll say this, I'm with you, Kim. I like the outcomes. I'm being coached right now extensively on my branding. As Oleg
Hmm.
knows ad nauseum, I'm working to death. I'm not at this point never in bed before 11:30, and I start my morning at 7 on the dot. And
Hmm.
so, well, hello, homegirl Melody. It is good to see you. We're talking about change. Oleg is dialing in from Athens, Greece. By the way, Athens, Greece, then versus now, has gone through a little bit of change. Something motivated the change in Athens, but I don't think it was anything internal. I think it was like getting bombed by Hitler, but or by
Yeah.
the Allies. I mean, whoever. But in any event, maybe it was Mussolini. I don't know. But in any event, so, Oleg, you are into the process of change. Kim, as I'm understanding it, is more about the outcome of change. I'm with Kim. I don't like this process. I like it, yes, because I'm learning. I feel my mind expanding. I feel taxed, but in a good way. But it is
Hmm.
hard. I have to do a lot more pre canned videos. And I'm finding that these videos, keeping them in a reasonable time is hard. Inevitably, I have a perfect take and then
Yeah.
screw up the last sentence and I have to fix it. I have to do a whole thing over
Yeah.
again because this is going up in social media, particularly on LinkedIn, where it's going to be a legacy document, and I don't want that foolishness up there. How can you even begin to like the process?
Well, I kind of look at it in two ways. I think what I started to understand is for me, it's not necessarily one or the other. I think it's a combination of both, and I think both of them have a role. So, what I mean by that is one of the things that interests me about change is the person that I become throughout the process. That's definitely of interest to me. But
Hmm.
the other part is, I think, what you mentioned, and that's this concept of outcomes. I would be lying to you if I told you that I don't think of outcomes. I do think of outcomes. I think outcomes at certain times are important to me because, in a way, they're like mile markers. For example,
Hmm.
if I'm picking up a book and I'm able to see that the last page is going to be page 298, it helps me pace myself. It helps me to better understand that, okay, this is the number of pages I have to read in order to get to the end of this particular story. So I do think that outcomes serve a purpose. Now, I think that outcomes or by looking solely at outcomes for me has been at times a little bit dangerous. And what I mean by that is situations where I'm not able to see the outcome clearly. For example, you and I, as well as Kim and Melody, we're in professions where the outcome is not always seen off the bat.
Yeah.
You don't know when you're going to get your next speaking engagement. You don't know when you're going to get your next coaching client. You don't know who are the people that are going to read your work, like Melody's
Right.
work, and at
Right.
what hour, what day, how it's going to make them feel. So there's just so much that's unknown about that process. And that's what I think for me, I really try and almost like develop a boundary for myself that yes, I'm here for the process. I'm more interested in the person that I become. And the only reason why I say that is because I think in focusing on the process and the skills that I gain through that process, it helps me to replicate that for the next outcome, for the next milestone, for the next goal, rather than being solely focused on that goal, missing everything that I've learned leading up to that goal and not being able to replicate it for the next milestone.
We're
So I
talking.
think
Oh, go ahead. Please
I think
finish.
I think there's that part, and I also think that in focusing on the outcome, it also serves as a additional component of motivation,
Hmm.
which sometimes the flame burns out. That's just that's real.
So Kim talks about accountability and the leadership role that a coach can bring into the table. And I tell you, Oleg, all the time, I'll tell anyone, my coach and my branding implementation, he's grabbed me by the back of my suspenders and rolled me in the grass. Yes, leadership. Sometimes I experience it as domination, but it's not domination. He's not telling me what to do. I'm the client. But at the same time, that accountability,
Hmm.
it can be very difficult to take. Can be ego deflating. It can be it can be definitely painful, particularly if you kind of embarrass yourself. But it does hold you, that accountability does lead to improvement. Now, I want to talk about change a little bit differently here
Hmm.
because we're talking about change with the assumption that it is a wonderful thing. You changed your life, and we're going to assume traveling around the world like you are is wonderful. Kim went to and saw, worked with coaches to help build up her business and her practice, and she's a big believer in coaching. And I assume that she does coaching as part of her practice as well with her clients, even though that's not technically her job description. And Melody, I would be shocked if it's not either seen a coach directly or has done some informal mentoring or coach of some sort. Just Melody's too warm and wise not to. I just
Hmm.
can't even imagine that Melody has done that. But we're embedding in this the idea that motivating us for change is better. Well, I know that I agree with that all the time. You
Hmm.
know, when I was ascending to the top of large organizational life, when I was scrabbling my way up the big org ladder, doing what I had to, getting my sleeves and my knuckles dirty and wafting around in the mud, there were times when I said to myself, I need to make a change. I need to be something different than I am. I'm too good. I care about my staff. I care about being of service to others. Maybe I need to change and be more power hungry. maybe I need to change and stop caring about other people. Maybe I need to roll some other people in the gravel and not make it as nice as my coach is being to me. And there have been times when I have thought, and I know people have been this way, they said, I need to change, but it's to become
Mm-hmm.
something at least arguably worse. Maybe a person of lesser character or of different character. Or a person who cares less about others, or who has a strong, who's willing to make the sacrifices that they need to in order to get what they want. Maybe there's someone who says, I'm motivated to change from being that sweet ingenue from Topeka, Kansas, to some hard ass, ball busting brute who gets joy out of laying people off so I can save my money, my company money, and I can help build it up. And then I can sit on a golden throne and live a life of luxury. And I can also change and stop caring about other people. And I'll be honest
Mm-hmm.
with all of y'all, there are times when I wish I could change and not be empathetic, because I do feel empathy. I genuinely care about other people. I genuinely
Mm-hmm.
feel love. And a lot of times I wish I could change. Sometimes I've even asked myself if there was an operation that could do something to the part of your brain that causes you to feel empathy, or that has those neural connections that lead to deeper feelings to other people, maybe I'd go and have that operation. Then I wouldn't care. I could just use my intellect unfiltered by these feelings about other people. I could change. Is that a good sort of change? Is change is being motivated to change? Oh, and by the way, in that case, I'd totally be with Kim. I'd be outcome oriented, because I assume the process, maybe the process of a moral or a psychological or a behavioral descent isn't all that hard. I don't know. But the outcome could be more gratifying. What do
Mm-hmm.
y'all think?
Well, I think that I think you're onto something there, because the question that came to my mind as you were sharing is, what even makes change possible? And I know that in some situations in my life where I wished for certain things to change, I either wished for them too quickly, or I chose to take a series of decisions that were maybe a little bit premature. So, for example, when I had friendships as well as relationships that, let's say, didn't work out to the best of their ability, I would quickly try to change the circumstances. I would try and get out of them.
Mm,
But what I realized over time was that it might have been better actually to stay longer in some of them, because A, there was a greater lesson to be learned, and B, each one of the relationship has its own kind of rough spots. You know, it has the bumps and bruises along the way. And I know that for me, when I was relatively young, that was one of the things that I try to avoid. I try to avoid the bumps and bruises. I wanted to only be in a situation where it is all rainbows and sunshine and no storms in between. And then over time, I realized that throughout life is that it's really not realistic for any relationship to be built upon that every time.
mhm.
Even with my best friend, there are times when him and I have had disputes, starting from minor things to major to whatever the topics. I've had things like that with my parents. I've had things like that with everyone that I know. I think I think conflict is something that I don't try and shy away from anymore. And I think part of conflict requires maybe to change, to adapt, or to adjust, but not necessarily abandon some of these things. So I think that, yeah, I agree with you. I think that changing the circumstances, it doesn't always guarantee the light switch moments. It doesn't always guarantee that it's always going to go from negative to a positive or vice versa. I think that sometimes certain things maybe aren't meant to be changed.
When it comes to change, I see from Melody's second to last comment that you've got a friend here, because Melody is with you about process. She says she leaves outcomes to the universe. And when we plan, we can, we can change with as we learn. And that is actually a fair point. And thank you for raising that, Melody. But I want to get to the heart of my question. process then, Melody and Oleg? Is the process of change worth it if you change into something that is worse?
Well, I think you get to decide that though. Because if you were to change into something that is worse, then theoretically, couldn't you also make an argument that you can change out of that?
Yeah, but maybe being worse is fun. Right? Like maybe being worse puts you in a position where you're a tyrant. And you get to be like, I had a podcast guest for the Toastmasters podcast that I host, not my Purpose Highway podcast. And he was in the Australian military. And he was stationed in Iraq, and the location of where he was stationed was Saddam Hussein's palace. And he was talking to me about what the inside of that palace looked like, what it was like to be living inside Saddam Hussein's palace, which I have to admit was pretty entertaining. That being said, what if I decided to change and be more like Saddam Hussein? I could be worse. Live in a palace, terrorize my people, make enemies, rain down destruction on the world, but have a harem, have gold toilets, all the riches in the world. He said that there were entire rooms with paintings of Saddam Hussein in them. So I could have all paintings of me everywhere and just feel like I'm some sort of ancient Babylonian god and just live a life that's amazing. And the process of doing that might be challenging, but becoming something worse. All right, is it really up to me to decide? Or maybe I could say it's up to me. Yeah, actually being a worse person is better. So I'll terrorize everyone and have absolutely no moral character at all. It's all up to me.
I think what's up to you, in my opinion, is it's not necessarily what is going to be produced from the actions that you take, but what is up to you are the choices that you make. And I think, is a worse situation better or not for you? I think you get to decide that, and maybe as well as other people if the lives of others are at stake. I'll share with you a brief story. As I was actually making my way to Acropolis, I ran into a street performer, and him and I started talking, and it's actually really really an amazing experience. And I don't know if you remember this, Scott, but when you were going up to Acropolis, I don't know if you were able to see a lot of the different street performers who play different instruments.
Yeah.
So there's this one guy, he was playing. It wasn't a guitar, but I don't remember the instrument. It was some sort of variation of guitar. Him and I started talking, and I just asked him. I said, "How did you get here? Like, what changed in your life in order for you to get to this particular position?" And he shared with me a story that, ironically enough, is something that I actually experienced living the past couple months in Austin prior to embarking on this trip. And that is, he said when he was younger, his car insurance had expired. His car insurance expired 3 days before a big accident that happened in his life that ended up changing the trajectory of his life moving forward. And that is, he got into an accident and 4 people were killed as part of this process.
Wow, that's horrible.
Now, from that point forward, it changed his life completely, because then, even though he didn't have to go to jail, I believe what he said, but he had to pay fees for the rest of his life for that particular mistake. And there's something that he said that was really profound in that, which is, I think, directly to what you said. And that's, he told me, we all make mistakes, and we all have to pay for those mistakes sooner or later. And I think it directly ties into your concept of change, or changing into something that may be worse than what you wish to be. Is that at the end of the day, when the time comes, and the most mysterious part about that is you don't know when that time is going to come.
Yeah.
But when the time comes, you will have to pay for the decisions that you made. You will have to pay for the decision to be a dictator or whoever it is. And I don't believe anything is meant to last forever. I think, if anything, I really do believe in this concept that everything is temporary. So, in fact, one of the things that I've experienced in traveling from the different hostel from another is the people that I met along the way. And one of them, I having a conversation with today, and we were talking about this whole concept of leadership in the different countries that he was able to be a part of, and the ones that he would like to go to. And somehow we talked about many different governments, but then we got into subjects like North Korea, for example, right? And so you look at that particular situation, and then as an outsider, you think, well, when is this going to change? And then it's easy to say that it's never going to change because it's been like this for however many years. But then you look at other places that have
Like Greece.
experienced, like Greece, and they have had change. So it is possible, I guess, at the end of the day.
Melody talks about changing for the worse from a frame of ego. It's ego taking control, as opposed to being something that is really driven by some greater good, which I think she mentioned earlier in her comments. And Kim talks about this assumption that we have that change is automatically going to be for the better. And there are some things in there I want to just leave up on the screen. Yeah. And I want to just hold on to that, Kim, because I'm going to get back to that in a second. And then Kim also says later, after Melody says, ouch, change can be voluntary or involuntary. Now, maybe I will go directly into that second remark for a minute because it's interesting. Kim, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what you were referencing with regards to involuntary change and what your thoughts are about how we experience that differently. While you're doing that, and while it takes time for our platform to be able to upload that so that Melody and anyone else watching this can take it in and contribute, I want to talk a little bit about a book I've been reading recently, which is one of many books I love to read about Greek mythology. And in particular, it's talking about the Iliad. In the Iliad, which is a story about the Trojan War, there is a Trojan princess named Andromache. And Andromache is married to the main Trojan hero whose name is Hector. And Hector knows that he's going to battle the principal Greek hero, Achilles, and that he being Hector, will likely die. And so he leaves Andromache behind. And he tells her that, and his infant son, who is on her arms or maybe on her shoulders or something, he says, I'm about to leave, and it's with a huge amount of sorrow because I know I'm not going to live. And what's going to happen is that Troy will lose this war. And you, Andromache, my princess, who used to be up there weaving on your loom all day and hanging around and having fun and living a life of freedom and joy, you're going to be a slave. And you're going to be a slave that is raped repeatedly. And you'll be there handmaidening other women, whereas they used to be the handmaids for you. And you will be looking at the weaving that other women do and remembering the days that you used to be able to do the weaving for yourself. And your son won't be yours anymore. And he'll be taken from you, and anything could happen to him. What would really happen would be that he probably would become a catamite, and which is pretty awful. And there was this whole thing. And then she and this hero Hector's father are watching the whole thing play out on the walls of Troy. And she goes through this lament when Hector dies. And she's so overcome with emotion that she literally rips, the veil off her face and just tears her clothes in half because she knows that her life is about to irrevocably change involuntarily. And that's a level of change that is so profound. And it happened all the time in the ancient world. This was not something that was particularly shocking to a Greek audience, because it was understood at that time, and certainly later under the Romans and many other societies, that if there was a war and your city-state conquered another people, those peoples, at least the nobility, would at best become hostages, but usually they would become slaves forever. You would be working or living as a royal one day, the next you'd be in the mines of Numidia for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Would change be worth it then? Because that's not a voluntary change.
Yeah, because I was just thinking about the same exact thing. And I was more so thinking of if there was a draft, right? If there was a draft that happened right now, and I had to enlist, or you had to enlist, or anyone else that's listening, how would that change my life? How would that change my philosophy on life as well, and what I value and what I may not? And so I don't know. I personally don't know, because I haven't had to even ponder a decision like that, where not only my town was under attack, but for example, even considering to enlist in military. And I don't know if you've ever had to do that, Scott, as
Yeah,
far as just think about the possibility. I've never
absolutely.
had to, think of the possibility, and I have had and still do many friends who have enlisted in different armed services. I have people who have gone into Marines, the Army. My uncle was in the Navy. I have another friend of mine who was in National Guard. So quite a few different sectors. And what always fascinates me about those situations is in hearing the stories and hearing the reasons for why they chose to do it. Every single one of them did it for a different reason. Some people actually did do it to pay off student loans.
Mhm,
Other people did it because it was a way for them to preserve their family legacy, because this
mhm,
is what was done before them,
mhm,
from passing down from their dad to their grandfather to whoever else. So what I've realized was that in some of those situations when I was younger, especially, and I wasn't able to see the other person's perspective. For example, when one of my friends, he chose to go into the military just so his college debt would be forgiven, I remember the judgment that I had made in the moment when I first heard him say that. I was just like, why don't you just go get a job, right?
mhm,
It's going to take you probably the same number of years or maybe even less.
mhm.
So I didn't understand that, but over time I've learned to kind of hold peace and really let go of the judgment and know that his decision is his decision, whether it felt voluntary or involuntary. Like those were the consequences he was going to have to live with. Um, so I'm going back to your story and the concept of kind of the battlefield, and if anything were to take place, I don't know. I don't know. I think, I guess depending on the situation, maybe sometimes you're not given a choice.
Well, and I would be curious to know how people psychologically adapt to that. I mean, a life of slavery, even here in the US, which at least in Greece and
Yeah,
Rome, you had a chance of buying your way out of it if you were in certain circumstances and you had more liberty and all that sort of thing. Wasn't the United States slavery was far, far worse than that by all accounts. But to be
yeah,
one day, like that movie,
but
12 week, 12 years a slave, one day you're
oh,
free, then
yeah,
you're kidnapped and
but also like not
Mhm.
to go complete off topic here, but I mean, look at Vietnam. Was that was that one of the last times that we had to use the draft?
I think the draft
Was
ended.
that
It
the
didn't
last
end
time?
after that, but it was. I don't believe we've actually used the draft since then. I don't think we used it during. By the time the first Gulf War went around, the draft really wasn't in the equation. We had an all
So think
volunteer
about
army.
that.
Yeah.
You had to wait, and I could be misquoting some people who have told me these stories, but I'm pretty sure you had to wait until like your number was called on TV, right?
I don't remember exactly how they did that. I mean, I know that I registered for the draft. It was still active when I was in high school. When I turned 18, I remember going to the post office and signing up
Wow.
for it. And I remember thinking, oh, if there is a war, I could be signed up and I could end up, I probably would have, I don't know, maybe I would have gotten a
But
student deferment or, but it might not have happened. I may have ended up enlisted and
yeah, but see what I find interesting in your case is, were you even able to comprehend the possible change that
yes.
you would
Oh yeah.
really?
Yeah. When you go up and you sign that thing, hell yeah. I can't speak for anyone else, but I was very aware of that. I was aware that I could suddenly be shipped away and that my future that I wanted for myself might not be what I wanted and that I could
Oh,
be killed or
yeah.
mutilated. because that's
Yeah.
what happened to a lot of people. They got these horrible or just psychologically scarred. There's a scary photo and a sad photo of a World War One, someone that was in the trenches there, and it's a man, a U.S. soldier who's smiling in the middle of all this warfare and blood around him, and he just has this look in his eyes that is utterly deranged, and his smile is it's totally nightmare fuel. And I have sympathy for this person. He was driven crazy by everything that he saw around him, and that's the sort of change that is utterly, as Kim would say, involuntary and utterly tragic, and that he wasn't able to adjust to. Kim raises, by the way, in her long comment, something that goes to this exact point. And Kim, I'm actually glad you raised this. Sometimes memories like what you referred to in that post are things that are seem so bizarre or so surreal that I'm sometimes wonder if they really happened. So Kim is referring to a woman who's now a woman who we went to high school with, and I think she was a pom-pom girl or a
You know
cheerleader.
her?
And I do know her, and Kim knows her as well. And she, exactly what Kim describes happened. She was with some friends in a van, and it was actually by my house, not maybe 3 minutes away from where I lived. They had a car wreck. There may have been, I believe that there was drinking involved, and a couple of people died at a very young age. And I remember the news, this was in the news. I remember there was a shot of this girl who was a teenager in handcuffs being taken for arraignment at court. It was very shocking. All of us knew someone that had killed someone, and we knew the people who passed away too. And Kim, I think, rightfully doesn't focus on the families of the people who died. That is a change we all have to endure. And it's something that everyone faces if they live long enough. But what Kim is talking about here was a decision that was made by someone who was young. It's a decision many, many people besides this young person, Tammy, made.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And she had something horrible happen to her. And there is the jail time that I believe that she had, if I remember right, which would be a change but also the change in the sort of the Greek street performer that you talked about. Right. Some people died. And to have to live with that forever. And that's the sort of change where I don't know how one could come back from. I don't know if there's anything, there's a process I would imagine that would perhaps help you cope as well as you could. But if it's like this situation with this girl, Tammy, where there was no intent, I don't think anyone who knew her would think that she was a cold-blooded killer. That's the sort of thing where I don't even know how a process can begin to be part of that change.
Well, I think I think it's a really interesting question, and I by no means can answer it for anyone who has gone through an experience like that. But I think what I have found is in maybe similar circumstances, what has helped me is exactly what Kim described, and that's volunteering, wanting to be a part of that change, looking for the lesson, and touching upon Melody's last point, because what I have found is that when I refused to look at change as something that is actually helping me mold into X, Y, and Z person or whatever it is, then it becomes suffering. Then it becomes truly suffering as it's defined in every dictionary. When I'm refusing to be a participant of the circumstances, which I know you and I, we talked endlessly about this, but it brings up another question, which is slightly different from change, but maybe not. And that is, do some of these changes happen in people's lives in order to help them get closer to that calling, to that purpose, to that meaning? Is that random? Is there intention? Like and if so, like how do we actually tangibly know that it's one or the other or both?
I have a feeling Melody may have something to say about this, and I'd be quite curious to hear what she does have to say. I'll be shocked if Melody doesn't have something to say. I have no idea what Kim would think about this, actually. I have none. And it's interesting. I'd be curious to hear what Kim had to say. But, I'm sorry. I did want to say something about that.
Do you think all four of our childhoods were quote unquote meant to be? The two of ours,
so the one thing that I've been reading about lately is I've been sort of reading about new and emerging theories about consciousness and its role in the universe, as well as its role in our lives and what it means for lives, is the concept that for people who, so if you believe in this, which an increasing number of people do, that we're all connected by a universal consciousness, and that parts of that consciousness inhabit individual bodies and come into the earth and they leave, and then they may inhabit different bodies for a while, and there's learning and experience that occurs. And one thing that I have read that I find very interesting, I don't know whether I believe it or not, I don't know whether I believe anything. That's what I've learned. I don't know if I believe in anything. Is that there's that once you've lived a life, your soul goes into this space of consciousness that we don't really remember usually, unless we do some sort of past life regression, or if we do have some other experience, or maybe if you're very young or you're about to die. And when you are doing that, you basically go into a space where you have these guides, and they show you a whole, almost like a video screen full of lives that you can choose from, and you collaborate with these guides who help you figure out what is the right life for you to enter into to deal with whatever lessons you have to learn. And according to this line of thinking, yes, all of that is chosen. You're chosen because and sometimes even accidents that happen, or tragedies that people suffer, or the moment of death, even people that are shot, like let's say, and killed young, they choose that because they need their souls, or the consciousness, the larger consciousness that they're part of, needs them to experience perhaps some sort of balancing or some sort of lesson in empathy, because maybe they killed someone when they were in a prior life or whatever. Now, I know not everyone believes this. I know many people believe there's nothing after death. Others believe in more traditional monotheistic past life punishments, and there's no preview about what might happen to you in your life. Does that begin to address your questions? And Melody, that's why I said I thought that you probably would have a lot to say about this.
Do you think that if that's true, then therefore does it imply that you can endure the changes that those particular events are going to bring into your life?
Yes. Before we go into that, I want to say hi to our new monthly co-host, along with Chris Sykes.
That's a really good
Brian
book, by the way.
Goldsack. What'd you say?
It's a really good book. Have you read it? Michael Singer?
Yes, The Surrender Experiment. Melody, Kim, I suspect both of you have read that. If either of you have not read it, get your asses onto Amazon now and read it. And that's so true, right? That is about sort of accepting. That leaves aside things like consciousness and life and all that sort of stuff, and saying that it says that the universe has a larger purpose, as you've described it, or a larger tapestry that we're all part of. This is a J.R.R. Tolkien theory, and that we just surrender to that, and it will take us where it wants us to take us. And that the troubles and toils that we have a lot of times are related to us fighting against that. And if we don't, then the universe's plans for us are probably better than we can imagine. Brian, thank you for raising that book, and it's so good to have you here on a night that you're not hosting. Oh, and Melody hasn't read that book. Melody, I'm floored. That's a totally Melody book.
It's a really good book. He has another one that speaks to a similar concept called the Untethered Soul.
Yeah, he's a genius.
I love the way that he's able to put the thoughts together. But going back to the point that I brought up, so what I've been curious about in regard to this concept of change in the circumstances that I was born into, and you were born into a set of circumstances, and Kim, based on the conversation that with her, and also I believe Melody, I'm curious when it comes to the endurance part, being able to endure the change that the events are going to bring into your life. Do you believe that you're only able to endure up to that particular threshold? Or are you able to endure anything and everything that comes from those? So, for example, because I've been wondering that, like, if in knowing the circumstances that I've survived for the first 9 to 12 years of my life, does that put me in a position where I can endure even greater hardship? Or is that the threshold?
I think that, yeah, my gut instinct is that we can always endure more hardship than we think that we can, simply because there is always someone that's suffering more who has a greater degree of hardship. And if they can do it, my feeling is I can too. Now, some people would disagree. Some people would say I can't deal with it. That being said, there is a threshold. Okay, nightmare fuel time. I
Mm-hmm.
read recently about a very, very wealthy man who didn't trust what was at the time of this incident modern medicine. Thought as a successful rich person, he knew better than these people that were in the medical establishment. So when he started having back pain, he ignored the advice of his doctor and went to a someone who was presenting with some alternative therapies. And this person gave him some medicine. I don't remember exactly the form that it was in, but it actually did make his back feel better. So he took more of them under the blessing, more of them under the blessing of this person. Well, it turns out that this medicine was basically a highly radioactive substance. The reason his back felt better was because it had killed all of the nerve endings in his back. And it later gave him such severe radiation
Mm-hmm.
poisoning that his jaw, and there are photos of this, it's shocking. His jaw rotted and fell off. And he died and had to be buried in a lead coffin. And that coffin has been quarantined. It's in a place no one can get to and won't be able to for 10,000 years, because that's how long that body is going to have that level of poison in it. Now, if I have radiation poisoning and my jaw drops off, that's a threshold beyond what I can bear. And I would probably have just said, kill me, except I
Yeah.
couldn't talk. But if I was able to express myself in any way, just give me the damn gun.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that there are thresholds that beyond which we can suffer. There are thresholds. I wonder this in particular about mothers who lose their children. That being said,
Mm-hmm.
that's something people can and they do endure. I would imagine if I was a mother to lose my baby, that would be pain beyond what I could even imagine bearing. Yet I know someone that happened to her. She lost her child when he was 23 years old in a car wreck, and she wasn't the same, but she endured. She survived. It was a change that she did adapt to.
Mm. What has been your threshold to this point?
I haven't reached it yet. I knew, and we've discussed this before on this
How do you
show,
know that? How do you know that you haven't reached it yet?
because
Solely because you're
nothing,
still here?
yeah. And the only time I thought I would reach an actual threshold, or that I couldn't get past of suffering, it was a physical threshold, not an emotional threshold, although I guess at some point they become interrelated. I have an allergy to penicillin that I didn't realize I had until I was taking it for a while. And I got hives over about 75% of my body. And it was
Mm.
it was awful.
Wow, man.
And I remember telling my husband at one point, this is really personal, but people need to hear these stories. I told him, David, get a knife. Get a knife. I'm ready to do it. I was in that much pain. Now, he,
Mm.
of course, refused, became very upset and was like, no. And he was, were able to calm me down off the ledge. I think I got into a bathtub that was heavily salted or had some things in it that were able to numb how I was feeling. But that was as close as I've come to feeling like I'd reached the threshold. But even then, at the end of the day, it wasn't quite the threshold because I didn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think trying to think of I think I'm in a similar boat as you are. I've definitely had a fair share of challenging experiences throughout my life, but I think what I've always maintained throughout all of them is this belief that somehow things are going to get better or somehow things are going to change. And over time, I started to shift that and started to realize that they may not always get better, but they can change. And I do believe in this other thing, because this is what my experience has taught me, and I don't know if your experience has taught me the same thing, or Brian, Melody, or Kim, or whoever else that's tuning in right now, is that I do believe that in some situations, things do get worse or can get worse before they can get better. So it's not necessarily jumping directly to the better, but I think things could get worse before they get better. And the only reason why I believe that is because in some of the things that I've experienced, for example, the decision that I made prior to that thing happening wasn't the like I don't know how to if I'm making sense here, but like it's almost as if like the storm hasn't completed itself,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know? And that's why I think like sometimes life presented these situations in my life where things did get much, much worse before they started to get a little bit better. But that's solely because I was kind of like on this wave of all the consequences due to the thousands and thousands of decisions. And something else that I'll briefly mention before you share, I had a conversation with his name is J.R. Martinez, and he really helped me see this thing through this perspective that I truly haven't been able to see before. And that's we were talking about this concept of decisions and opportunities. And the way that he views decision is that he says that a decision is simply a doorway to another decision.
Mm-hmm.
A decision is not necessarily a doorway to a better decision or a worse decision. It's just a doorway to a decision.
Mm-hmm.
That decision could be better or worse. And I think that what I've realized in hearing him say that is I built so much of my world for so many years off of the other concept in thinking that, okay, I'm going to make this decision and it's going to automatically lead to a better decision. And then that's going to become even a better decision and a better decision. But life taught me that that's not always the case.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm making the decision with the quote unquote best information available, but am I processing the information in the correct way? I don't know. Do I have the ability to even process that information? Who knows? So yeah, decisions grow out like roots, and you never know. You never know what tree's gonna come out from that.
Step back a bit, if we may. Melody talks about having been on the brink of physical and emotional oblivion, I assume. And that is saying to me, though, that even in Melody's case, she's been on the brink, but she has somehow managed to persist. And the threshold for what she can continue to engage with and endure is pretty high. Kim talks about manifesting as a tool to be able to bring about voluntary change for the positive. Congratulations, Kim. You got yourself a man, honey. Bam. And is he putting a ring on it? Well, even if not, I'm happy for you. In addition, you got 90 clients from 8. Okay. Kim, just make everyone feel bad, okay? Just make us all feel bad. That's okay. You're taking us to the brink of our own mental extinction by throwing out stats like that.
Yeah,
I
some of us
still
are
love you.
just starting the careers.
What'd you say?
Some of us are just starting the careers. Seeing numbers like that, we may
Kim,
not
that's
make
pretty
one change.
magical. Yeah, that's a change. And by the way, has that been a change that you like, Kim? Because some people, when they grow too fast, or if they have that sort of explosive growth, it's actually a change that they end up regretting. A lot of companies go into bankruptcy because they grow too fast and they haven't had the wherewithal, they don't have the resources, infrastructure, the cash flow management systems to be able to sustain that, or they don't have. My own company that I was had a co-owner with, we grew explosively fast during our time together, and he didn't have the mindset to be able to deal with that. And so I'm curious as to your thoughts about that sort of change. But seriously, Kim, congratulations for that. And then Melody shares a little bit more. Wow. You've learned things through being the oldest person who has that autoimmune disorder that is out there. Melody, That's amazing. Now, you're still young. So keep on going because you got a long way to live with that, honey. You got a big life ahead of yourself. And then Kim says she needs someone. Hey, we're keeping it real here tonight. I love you, Kim. So let's talk a little bit about manifesting. And that's something, believe it or not, that we've never discussed on this show. And I've got to give a shout out here. Kim, was this manifesting practice that you engaged in, was it with the manifestation queen herself? Miss K. Walker? Kelly K. Walker? I love that name, by the way. Anyone who has a name like Kelly K. Walker, just for having that name, I just love them. And I would like to know whether Oleg manifesting has been a way for you to bring about change in your life. And
Of
if so,
course,
how have you manifested?
creation, I think, has been some of the biggest tools that has helped me and maybe even saved me in many of the situations. I think starting from the ages when I was young and choosing to create and change my circumstances with whatever resources were available to me has helped me a lot. Over time, I think what I've also begun to realize is there were so many situations throughout life where I was waiting for the resources to come to me. And so my question shifted, which is, I think, another form of manifestation. And that's it really no longer became about how can I manifest more resources, but rather how can I become more resourceful with the resources that are already available to me. And so that in a way has also helped me progress. So I think I think creation and manifestation are beautiful processes because they've allowed me to step into that change quicker.
Mm.
They've given me this, I guess you could say, maybe an illusion of control over my
Focus?
circumstances, my focus. They gave me a sense of clarity. They gave me a sense of purpose. I do, I partially agree with what Melody had said here, and that's the greater the suffering, the greater the purpose. I think, um, in certain situations, yes, like in my life, I think uh, that has definitely played a role. I mean, people who were in Chernobyl, like I can't say the same thing for people like so. I think it's circumstantial when it comes to that. But I think that for me, once I've been able to experience different pain and different types of suffering, what I've started to understand, especially in the recent years, is that all of that is energy, and how can I use this energy now? It actually it briefly share another story with you, Scott. Remember that time we were sitting in the room and Mark, he was a speaker at the event we went to in New York.
Okay, yes, I
Mark,
know who you're talking about. I'm forgetting his name, but yes, it was a National
and
Speakers Association that we event that we went to here in New York City.
and do you remember the exercise that he told us to do halfway through? And that's he said, think of one of your deepest emotions.
Yeah,
And it would oftentimes, I think he said, like anger or something, that's something
yeah,
that like really fueled you.
yeah,
And then what if you were to use that energy and that source towards something that you're passionate or
yeah.
towards a project that you want to do? And so the reason why I bring that up is because I have found that in situations where I find myself to be suffering or where I'm in extreme anger or whatever it might be, actually using that energy has been one of the bigger motivators or
Mm-hmm.
inspirations for change
Mm-hmm.
because it's almost like this fuel that's given to me. And now I get to choose, where do I put that fuel into? Do I
Mm-hmm.
put that into the gas tank or do I pour it straight down the toilet?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think that's the only two options that are always available, but I think it gets the point across that, like, even in those situations, that I've realized that I still have a choice in how I choose to use that energy and what for.
Well, speaking of how we choose to use our energy, Kim, I actually owe you an apology. I misread one of your remarks. I looked at it too quick and it's in a weird place in my computer. You said you hired someone in order, presumably, to handle going from the number of clients you originally had to this vastly greater number of clients you had after manifesting. I read it quickly looking at it as saying you needed someone. And so when I was saying,
He's changing his remark.
yeah, I was
doing.
exactly. So I want to just lean into change and adapting to what was actually there as opposed to what I thought I saw by looking and reading too quickly. Hey, it happens sometimes. We just have to have a sense of humor about the things that we misread. It's embarrassing. Now,
what inspired you to make that correction?
I was talking about that earlier. Alignment with my values. So, as we've discussed before, I have an avatar that I aspire to be like. It is the god of the sun, Helios. And there are many things about Helios that I aspire to. This idea of rising to the top of the world and radiating light everywhere and nourishing and bringing life into the world through the rays that he and the knowledge and the ability to see everything. But one thing that's lesser known about Helios is that because he was the god of the sun and observed everything, he knew what was true and what was a lie. He was the guardian of oaths. And so part of why I like Helios and view him as my values avatar and my avatar generally is because of the commitment to truth and accuracy. And so I feel, just as a matter of values, if I state something that is incorrect, to own it. I can't always tell the truth. Sometimes I mistakenly make a misrepresentation, as I did here, but my values require then that I own that and correct it and say something that actually is accurate.
You're going to have to answer Brian's question because I don't know.
So, pop quiz. Who was the angel of light in the Bible? Very interesting. I know the answer to that question. Very, very interesting point, Ryan. It was Lucifer. Satan, before he fell, he was the brightest and most beautiful being created by God until he thought that he was greater than God. And then there was a war in heaven, and God kicked his you-know-what out, and he has lived as Satan, if you believe that story, ever since. And that is an interesting point because it relates to our conversation in two respects. And Brian, if you have additional thoughts about how that relates to our point, I would love for you to share it because I'm sure it will be conversation provoking. Change that is, as we mentioned earlier, triggered by ego. His ego drove him to believe that he was better than God. And so he chose to make a change in the order of heaven. He gambled. Oops. Lost in the biggest way possible, number one. And then number two, it goes as to how we can also change the lens through which we view any particular metaphor. So, for instance, I think about the god Helios as this radiant being that goes to the top of the sky and just showers the whole world with everything amazing that the sun does for us. But implicit in this metaphor that Brian brought into the conversation, the sun also sets. The sun also falls. Lucifer originally, by the way, was conceived of as the planet Venus, the morning star. And the morning star itself also changes position and eventually it isn't always in our line of sight. So that's where that story came from. And Brian, I would love for you to add more to this. Jessica! Girl, it is good to see. I was wondering where you'd been. We've been talking about change and what motivates us to change. I was having to deal with the change of not seeing you on Squirrel Night. We're also talking about how much we can be expected to endure. And doing the show and not having you, that is more than I could even begin to endure. Both death and life well lived have motivated me to change my life. Wow. We can find inspiration in anything if we choose to. Brian says he wanted to be adored and worshipped. Yeah. Now, unlike Helios, I don't feel the need to be worshipped. I wouldn't want that. Make that clear. If the sun don't shine, I don't want blame for that.
Yeah.
It's funny because Caesar Augustus in the Roman Empire, when they initially wanted to make him a god while he was still alive, his response to that allegedly was, well, what if it doesn't rain? Okay.
Wow.
He wanted to be worshipped. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of change and speaking of time changes, I wanted to just briefly introduce or talk about Jessica's event that
Yep.
both you and I are going to be a part of.
Absolutely.
It's
And that I hope
this
everyone
Saturday.
joins. Yeah.
This Saturday, at the link at the bottom, and it's going to benefit two nonprofits. Overcoming Odds will be one of them, but it's at 4 p.m. And Jessica, if you could maybe even do us a favor and put the link in the comments so people can join directly or purchase their tickets or find other ways to support it.
Yeah.
Or maybe we can even do that as well.
Yeah. I'm going to be there. All
yeah.
cool people will be there.
Yeah. It's going to be an experience that will not be worth missing on. There it is.
Thank you, Jessica. Now, let's talk a little bit about some other inspiring things. There is a company that you and I know. It is a t-shirt printing company that Jessica actually has worked with. Custom printed t-shirts and hoodies. They also do embroidery on things like baseball hats and gym bags. And they employ people almost exclusively who are on the autistic spectrum. They are the sponsor of the show, and their name is Spectrum Design Foundation. They do some amazing work. Do you have anything that you want to just show us that might change this show a little bit? I love it. So, Jessica, thank you for sharing with us that those shirts came out so well. I'm going to make sure that the CEO of Spectrum Designs, who actually has appeared on this show, his name is Patrick Bardsley, knows about this. I've been actually in text communication with him for the past few days. Thank you for letting us know that. I think that will mean a lot to them. I want to make a brief announcement before we close for the evening. Next week, we are going to have one of our regular co-hosts with us, Casey Berman. And he is an intellectual giant and always a pleasure to work with. We are also going to be having from Belgium the wonderful poet Dorothy Ogre, and it will be an incredible conversation. So I look forward to everyone coming back and joining us in yet another amazing conversation. Then after that, we are going to have, starting this month, the third Thursday, Brian Goldsack and his co-podcast host of the Success Fundamentals podcast, Chris Sykes, as regular co-hosts. They were here last month. They knocked the ball so out of the park. They've knocked it all the way to Saturn and beyond, out of the solar system, honestly, that Oleg and I immediately asked them to join us as permanent co-hosts, and they were gracious enough to say, yes, this is going to be something very exciting for everyone involved. And yes, Jessica, Casey, and Dorothy on one show. It is, yes, I know, I've already put on my seatbelt. And then Brian says he can't wait for his guest episode. We are going to be making sure, by the way, because we're all about connecting people to each other here on this show, that you get to
Mhm.
know Casey Brian, and you are going to really enjoy him. And then, of course, the fourth Thursday of the month, we will have the one and only dear friend of ours and of the show, Trip Bodenheimer, as one of the regular guest hosts. We also have other special guest co-hosts coming up, including Dusty DeGroff, who
Mhm.
is from Colorado and has a great podcast about being about being a dad, and then Elizabeth Kristoff, who is an applied neuroscience expert and who is one of the
Yeah,
most articulate,
she's exceptional.
creative, and yes, really thought-provoking people that we know. And we have many more surprises coming up and great conversations. It is wonderful. Oh, and Melody says, ask Patrick if
Patrick
he
Barzley,
has
yeah.
heard of, yeah, Patrick Bardsley, if he has heard of Clubhouse International. Their mission matches. I will absolutely ask that. Thank you so much, Melody. And if he hasn't, I probably will introduce you, just because you're both wonderful people. He loves to network, and I'm all about in making sure that wonderful people know each other. In the meantime, everyone who has joined in this conversation, thank you so much. My
Yeah.
life has changed because of you. Oleg, do you have anything you want to say before we sign out?
No, I think this has been really thought-provoking for me, and it definitely helped me see change in a completely different lens that I was able to see it before. So I'll say this, I said this before and I'll say it again. It's you and I start the conversation, and it will be other people as well, but at the same time, it's everyone else that chooses to join that makes this conversation even better.
Amen.
And that's why I appreciate everything that this space creates, and everyone that comes part of it. Melody and Jessica and Brian and Dorothy and Elizabeth and so many others who can make this space even more special.
Absolutely.